This morning we're going to continue this look at minor prophets in the Bible, people that we probably don't study an awful lot. We might be more likely to skip over those small books sort of in the middle of your Bible. Excuse me, but I hope that you see in our look so far over a few weeks that there's a lot of relevant stuff in these books. This morning we're going to look at two prophets, give you an introduction to Amos and Micah. They lived around the same time, so that makes sense. But before we get to them, I'd like to actually shift gears and talk just briefly about a country over in Europe. It's a country I've never been to, probably never will make it there, but I actually do know a person who has traveled there. This person travels worldwide and has been to the nation of Luxembourg. Honestly, has anyone ever heard of Luxembourg? It is a very tiny country. I have two quick maps up here. Luxembourg, of course, this is all Europe. This little dot that's probably not much bigger than my laser there, that's Luxembourg. Tiny country between France and Germany in the middle there. This here, I like this because this gives us a better perspective. This is the state of Rhode Island, and this is Luxembourg. Luxembourg could fit inside Rhode Island. If it were a state, it would be our smallest state. But it's a sovereign nation. Go figure. Why do we care about Luxembourg? Well, Luxembourg ranks as the third richest country per capita in the world, meaning that the average, is it Luxembourger? I'm not sure. The average citizen of Luxembourg, to put it that way, earns about the equivalent of $150,000 a year. Not too shabby. Compare that to the United States, we're up to 85, 89,000 per year on average. When you take everyone and divide it and all that, we rank, I think, 9th. So Luxembourg is fairly wealthy even compared to our standards. But again, it's a small nation, so numbers can be skewed because of the small sample size. The thing about Luxembourg, when we think, oh, well, it's a small nation. By the way, to show you how small it is, there is a road that goes from east to west right across the country. You can drive from border to border in about 45 minutes, honestly, literally. So put that in perspective. That's like, it could fit between here and Lebanon City, you know. But they're fairly wealthy. So before you think, hey, let's all pack up and move to Luxembourg and we'll all be rich, it doesn't exactly work like that because numbers are numbers, they're averages. There are certainly people who earn more than 150. There's a lot of people who earn less. And I mention that because 1 out of every 5, about 20% of the population is at risk of poverty, even though the average is $150,000 a year. So that shows you there's a lot that are making millions, and there's a lot that are barely getting by too. And that's the same, I think, in any country. I mean, the numbers are going to be off a little. You're going to have the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. Even here in the United States, we talk about income inequality, what we can do about that. And we're going to keep debating those things until the cows come home, or really until Jesus comes, I would rather say. But the situation in Luxembourg with their economy and their income distribution, it's not all that different from literally millennia ago. When you go back to the Old Testament times, around 750 BC, we're talking about the time of Jonah and the big fish and all that. Israel was dealing with the same thing. They had the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. Not everyone has to be the same, but the question is, how do the rich steward their money to support or help the poorest of the poor? The problem that Israel got into is that the richest of the rich turned a blind eye to the poorest of the poor. And so it became more of a selfish thing. Can I get more and more and more, at the expense of others? And I'm just hoarding wealth. And so because of that, God called a prophet named Amos. I love Amos. I do. He is probably, if I'd have to pick, my favorite prophet. Because, I'll tell you, back in my seminary studies, I never forget this, I had an excellent Old Testament professor. And in order to help us try to remember a little bit about these prophets better, he gave them nicknames. Some are more common, you'll find, and some he came up with. Jonah, for instance, he was the unwilling prophet. He didn't want to go, hence the big fish. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He wrote Lamentations. He was weeping over the destruction of the city. My professor calls Amos the cowboy prophet. He was a blue-collar guy. He didn't have the plush corner office. He wasn't a white-collar kind of a guy. He was probably not very polished in his language and speech. Not to say he was vulgar, but he was an everyday Joe. And God called him to this position of prophet. He literally had no theological education at all, yet God said, I want you to deliver a message. So he was obedient, and he did that. So that's a little bit about Amos. Again, he came on the scene whenever, all in all, the economy was doing well, but there were many people who weren't helping other people at the same time. And I'm just going to read 6 or so verses from Amos 4, but as I read these, try to keep track in your mind how many times you hear the words, you have not returned to me. That's what God says to his people here. And so reading out of the New International Version, Amos chapter 4, verses 6 to 11. I gave you empty stomachs in every city and lack of bread in every town, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I also withheld rain from you when the harvest was still 3 months away. I sent rain on one town, but withheld it from another. One field had rain, another had none and dried up. People staggered from town to town for water, but did not get enough to drink. Yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. Many times I struck your gardens and vineyards. I struck them with blight and mildew. Locusts devoured your fig and olive trees, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I sent plagues among you as I did to Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword along with your captured horses. I filled your nostrils with the stench of your camps, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I overthrew some of you as I overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. You were like a burning stick snatched from the fire, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. May the Lord's blessing be added to the reading and hearing of God's holy and perfect word. So I counted 5 times in 6 verses, and I'm pretty sure later in the chapter, God's not done with those words, but that's sort of the concentration there, one after the other. And so Amos was the exact opposite of the people that he was preaching to. Again, he was a blue-collar guy. He was not very knowledgeable in the scriptures, not very polished, yet God gave him a message to send to the elites. It's like if God sends somebody from Perry County to Hollywood and tells them, go tell them how it is. How do you think that would go over? Probably not as well as we would like. But just to give you a sense of Amos, this was not in Amos 4, but this is in Amos 7. He tells the people where he came from and why he's doing it. And honestly, in the entire Bible, I mean, I know that there's verses about God's love for us and all that, but what resonates with me most is Amos 7. There's 2 verses where Amos says, I was neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet, but I was a shepherd. and I took care of sycamore fig trees. But the Lord took me from tending the flock and said to me, go, prophesy to my people Israel. That's what he said. That's why I'm here. He says, I don't want to be here, but I just feel so compelled, like God literally picked me up and put me here. I just couldn't go against. I'm not like Jonah, I had no choice in the matter. So I'm just giving you a message from God, and that's the end of it. And so I'm sure he was a very politically incorrect kind of a guy. In the verses here, I try to shy away from taking too much of a large portion of Scripture. That way, sort of our focus gets off of where it should. But in the very beginning of Amos chapter 4, he is speaking apparently specifically to a group of very elite and wealthy women. And what he says to them, he says, you cows of Bashan. He calls a group of women cows. Now, yeah. Is he just being mean? What's going on here? He's not just being mean. I'm sure that probably he might have a dual meaning here. And again, don't take offense at this. He's not calling all women cows, although that has never been something that we want to be called. In this region of Bashan, they were known as having the prime livestock. They were fed the best diets. They were taken care of the best. And so he says, you people, you women specifically, you just like them. And so think about a cow for a minute. What do we use cows for? What are they good for? Can you ride a cow like a horse? No, I've never seen anyone ride a cow before. Can you use them to plow? I've never seen anyone do that. What do? All day long they eat. They graze and they eat and they get fatter and fatter and fatter. Why? So we can kill them and eat them. That's a cow's life, okay? And so there can be some other things he's getting at here. Maybe he's saying, you people are, you're really not much good for anything. You're just consuming. You're not giving back until, you're passing the inheritance along. He might have been talking about something like that. I think the fact that he says cows of Bashan means something in particular, that again, these were very elite type of cattle he was talking about. So nowadays, the whole politically correct crowd would not have much interest in Amos. He would, Amos is being Amos. Again, he's not saying this to make headlines, although I'm sure he got their attention. He called a group of elite women cows. What kind of response are you going to get? These were just people who they sought after money and power. They didn't help the poor, and probably lent to some of them being lazy too. You have the elite rich that, we have our investments and I don't have to work. I can lounge around all day and eat. They don't make bonbons anymore. I didn't think of eating bonbons, but anyway, that's what happens when I speak off the cuff up here. That's the kind of people we're talking about. And some things never change though, right? And so it's the rich get richer. And that really hasn't changed much either. The difference might be how we try to get rich. I have known some people in the past who have not been successful in this endeavor, but try to get rich quick by playing the lottery or sports gambling, stuff like that. You probably can't turn the TV on for very long before you see commercial for online sports betting, DraftKings and stuff like that. So that's a multi-billion-dollar industry, by the way. And so if these companies are making a lot of money, guess who's not making a lot of money? It's the people who are wagering. So, but the thing is, do you know that sports games are not the only thing you can wager money on? You can wager on what I can think are some of the craziest things out there. If you follow the Hollywood crowd, which I don't, but I've heard my share of pop music through the years. Taylor Swift, born in Pennsylvania. You might know, well, during football season, you can't get away from it, but she's engaged to a football player, Travis Kelce. And now it's a big thing. Is he going to retire and get married, or what's he going to do? I don't really care. But you can go online. I'm not suggesting this, but you can go online after church today, and you can place a wager if you think, when do you think they're going to get married? Who her maid of honor is going to be? Who his best man's going to be? Best man's going to be Jason Kelce, by the way, but he's his brother. That makes sense. Make some money there. So people bet on this kind of stuff. If you bet, by the way, that they were going to get married in 2025, you lost because they're not married yet. If you think that's a crazy thing to bet on, this next thing I'll share with you, I don't know whether to laugh or cry, honestly. And I'm dead serious about this. You can go online and you can place a bet if you think that Jesus Christ is going to return in 2026 as prophesied. You can put money on that. Or you can bet, nope, it's not going to be this year, it'll be next year or the year after. People are doing this. By the way, and when I see things like this, I'm like, it's like a train wreck. You just can't turn your head, and I had to read more. The odds makers are putting a 2% chance that Jesus returns this calendar year. I don't know how they come up with that number, but you can do that. So I only bring this stuff up because some people, they're using this as a get-rich-quick scheme. I'm going to take the odds here, 2% that he comes back. If he does, I can make a truckload of money. Jesus comes on the eastern sky. How's that going to work out? Say, I won the bet. Jesus, hold on a minute. Let me get my bookie. Let me get my payout. Now you can judge us. It's like, what do people think? Anyway, this is real. This is the world we live in. And so people trying to get-rich-quick scheme, nothing changes really through the years. It just looks a little differently, to be honest. And so that's the situation that Amos came into, and that's why God was pretty upset with them. They weren't helping the poor. There was income inequality, things like that. Well, Amos wasn't the only guy. I said there was also a guy named Micah. Micah is the one, I said he was a cowboy, probably a little behind on my slides here. Micah is speaking in the same time period. And I just want to read 6 verses from chapter 5 of Micah. Micah says, "Marshal your troops, O city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely. For then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be their peace. When the Assyrian invades our land and marches through our fortresses, we will raise against him 7 shepherds, even 8 leaders of men. They will rule the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod with drawn sword. He will deliver us from the Assyrian when he invades our land and marches into our borders." If you didn't catch that, someone's going to be born in Bethlehem. He will bring peace. Around Christmas time, we might pull out Micah chapter 5. That's where those things were prophesied and foretold. And that is the climate in which he came. He said, there's basically, God's going to judge you. The Assyrians would come in and they would defeat everyone. They take some people captive. But then he's looking long term to Jesus, 2,700 plus years and counting at this point. So somebody might read that back then and say, hey, the Assyrians are going to come in, Jesus is coming back, he's going to, take care of everything. That's not really what he says. That's what the people wanted, though, and it didn't happen that way. The people were supposed to live right in light of the promise of the Messiah. That's the same message for us today. Live right in the promise of Jesus. We aren't waiting for his first coming. We're waiting for his second coming. So what does that mean for us? Should we live differently than other people? If anything, we should have more reason to live right because we know he already came. He already came as God promised, and he promised a second time, so he's not going to miss the second time because God is trustworthy. And again, a little more of the climate in which Micah came and prophesied was it got so bad in the country, it was top down. Because usually when the leaders are bad, it filters down to the people. When the leaders are good, hopefully that rubs off on the people the way down as well. They had a king called Ahaz, not Ahab. He was a guy with Jezebel, different guy. Ahaz, not a good king as far as serving God. He went on a tour of Assyria, trying to make some international relations there. And he was very impressed with their pagan temples and altars. He said, this stuff looks pretty neat. So he comes back home and he tells his priest, this is what they had. I want you to copy their pagan altars, and I want you to design ours like theirs. This kind of stuff this king did. Not a good king. And so that was just one of many things that he did. That's why God's so angry with them. This is idolatry. You're modeling stuff after pagans. But we see God's forgiving nature and his promise of restoration. That's the promise of Jesus coming right there. And where Amos and Micah fit together nicely is their encouragement to live the right life while we have the opportunity to do so. Just two very brief verses. Amos says, seek God so that you may live. Simple enough. Everyone can understand that. Seek God so that you may live. And at the same time, Micah says, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And he says mortal, reminding you, you're going to die someday. So, he has shown you. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Maybe you've even memorized that verse somewhere in the past, a very popular one. So Micah had a few verses that we really do focus on, the Bethlehem prophecy and this one here. So knowing a little of the background now we can see why he was concerned for people to act justly and to love mercy, be merciful. You see someone who doesn't have, you help them out. And walk humbly with your God. That's sort of the catch-all. As far as act justly, well, a lot of people got rich in ways that weren't mostly on the up and up, as they say. There was a lot going on there, a lot of dishonesty. A lot of people earned fortunes unfairly or unjustly. Then if there was a business deal that went awry, well, we take it to the judge. Well, there were problems at the judicial level, too. A lot of the judges, they were dishonest. You pay me something in my back pocket, and I'll rule in your favor. And above all of that, if we say, well, you can surely rely on the clergy, on the priest to do the right thing, you would be wrong. A lot of them were dishonest too. They went along with the king, and they copied pagan altars. So no matter what segment of society, it was bad. And that's why God had to send these prophets. He gave them warnings, but he also said there's a promise for forgiveness. If you seek God, you may live, even though God says, you're going to die. And all you have to do is act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And again, the same thing applies to us to this very day. When we consider God's forgiving character, that's what we should be focusing on a lot in the church, because we have Jesus. We know that we can be forgiven through him. But at the same time, we need to be merciful to others. Have you ever met someone who maybe they go to church faithfully, but they just don't want to forgive someone, or they don't want to forget the bad things that someone has done? For many years now, I've been for a long time been a fan of Johnny Cash, Man in Black, and I know he did a lot of bad stuff in his life. A lot of things, did jail time, did drugs, stuff like that. However, last year I was in a bookstore, and I was looking through the biographies just to see what there was, and there's so many biographies of Johnny Cash, so, I don't know if there's much difference between them. But there was one that caught my eye, and the title of the book was, they called it The Redemption of an American Icon. Wow, Johnny Cash book, and they have the word redemption in the title. So I had to pull this out and look at it. Written by Pastor Greg Laurie. Okay, well, pastor's writing a book about Johnny Cash, so I'm thinking at least it should be clean, language-wise and all that. So I thought, hey, this is pretty interesting. So long story short, I read the book. It was a really good book. I mean, even if you don't care for the guy's music that much, the point that the author made is that when he was a young man, Johnny Cash had a relationship with Jesus. He was saved, as we say. Then as he became more famous and he had divorces and got into drugs and all this kind of stuff, through it all, you see more at the end of his life that he did hold on to that faith. I mean, we all sin. We all make mistakes. And so the book is about his redemption, hence the title. So we don't know for sure. If we get to heaven, we'll see if the Man in Black's up there with us. According to the book, though, the author tries to make the point that, yeah, he should be there, because despite the bad things he did, he was forgiven, and he asked forgiveness. He recognized that he did some really bad things. Do we look at someone like Johnny Cash and we think, well, again, you did drugs, you did time in prison, you had divorces, you did all this stuff, you're a bad guy, I don't want anywhere near you in heaven. Are we forgiving? And are we, do we see the opportunity for restoration? I think that's what we don't talk a lot about in the Bible, is Jesus promises not only to forgive us, but to restore us. That's the next step. And we get hung up on the previous step. Micah later in his book says, "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy." If God delights to show mercy, do we delight to show mercy to other people who have fallen and have made mistakes? Hopefully we do. And so, looking at two prophets together, I'm just hitting the high points here. There's a lot more we could say about it, but they did minister around the same time, which is why it makes sense to look at them together. We started with Amos calling a bunch of women cows. And then we made our way past the selfishness to God's encouragement for them to be forgiven, to return to me. He says, 5 times, yet you haven't returned to me, but the offer is still there. The door had not closed at that point. And when I look and try to wrap this up together, when I see Amos and Micah, it reminds me a lot of the story of the prodigal son. That's the nation of Israel. And the prodigal son, if you remember that story from that Jesus told us, he was the young man who he wanted life his way, on his terms. So he demanded his inheritance. He went out, he squandered it, he wasted it. Prodigal means wasteful, by the way. And it wasn't until he was sitting in a mud pit full of pigs, wishing that he had as much to eat as they did, that the light bulb finally came on. And said, back home, my father has so many servants that are doing so much better off than I am sitting in mud here. And so he humbled himself and he went back and he was forgiven. And not only forgiven, but the lesson for the prodigal son is he was restored. He said, bring the best robe, put that on it, bring a ring, put it on his finger, and kill the fattened calf too. That's the story of humanity. We fall, we find ourselves in some kind of a situation. We have to decide, is it better sitting and wallowing in a mud pit, spiritually speaking, or do we actually make the change in our lives? Do we realize that we've done wrong? And for the other people that we see who have done that, then you can talk about the older brother. He's a whole other issue. I've never left you, Dad. He doesn't deserve this and all that. He didn't realize he wasn't a forgiving soul himself, a loving and compassionate soul. So hopefully if we are the prodigal son, we don't become like the older brother later in our lives either, when we are upset at other people because they sin differently than we do, is really what it boils down to. And so in the story of the prodigal son, we see that the father dignified the request of his son, as foolish as it was. He knew it was a bad decision, but he also said, I'm not going to keep you here if you don't want here. And when he was out, he was wasting money on women and booze and gambling and who knows what else. It wasn't the father's job to go out and get him, because the father didn't go anywhere. It was his job to go back to the Father, because God never leaves us. We know where we can find him. And so if it resonates with you today, if you think, yeah, I've made mistakes in my life, we've all made mistakes. Some, we just look at more significantly or differently than others. God's waiting. And maybe you've already done that trip and that path. You've humbled yourself, you've gone back, you've been forgiven, you've been restored. Well, that gives you a story then. Gives you a testimony to share with others. And that's sort of what Johnny Cash did. He said, I made mistakes, don't do the same things that I did. And so that's why we know that he was restored as well. Because God ultimately promises that he will not cast off forever anyone who returns to him. God doesn't say the door's shut, you missed your opportunity. So many people think that, whether they just want a convenient excuse. I think that's what it is. They want a convenient excuse that God wouldn't want me anyway. Well, you're not worshiping the same God I am. The same God I know keeps the door open so that we can come back if we choose to. And so whether it's the days of Amos and Micah or our days today, he's the same God then as he is now, the same loving and compassionate God, caring and forgiving, willing to restore. And so let's not delay, because right now, just like his arms were open then, his arms are still open today. Let's bow our heads and close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day that you have given us. We thank you for Amos and for Micah and the story that tells us about the climate in which you sent them to bring messages. And they were pointed messages. They didn't beat around the bush, as they say. But at the same time, you also offered the opportunity for forgiveness. You said you can still turn from your wicked ways. you give us warnings. Each day is a warning to someone who isn't walking right with you. And so, God, we just pray for anyone here, anyone who might be watching either now or later online, that if your Holy Spirit is convicting them to make a change in their life, it's not too late if they're still breathing, because the door's still open, just like for the prodigal son, just like for the nation of Israel, and just like us. And so we ask for your blessing and protection as we leave this place. We thank you and praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.